Welcome to Podcast Done For You, the show where we make it as easy as possible for you to make the right choices to advance your podcasting career. So let's get started on the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Podcast Done For You. This time we're going to talk the numbers game. A lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about the numbers when it comes to listeners or viewers of your podcast. We're going to understand what they really mean, what you should really be looking for, and how to make the best use of it. Now, of course, as we start off every program, we like to tell you that this is stuff that you can worry about, but this is stuff that you can also hand over to someone like me in Podcast Done For You. We take care of everything for you, and you can do as little as you need to get your podcast up and running. But let's get into it. Let's really talk about the numbers game, because I hear a lot of people talking about how many downloads they get of every individual podcast or their podcast overall. And there are people that are talking about, oh, such and such is getting 1 million, views or listens or downloads. Now, first of all, there is this whole idea of the difference between all of those. And there is no absolute clarity on all of these things, I'd have to tell you, because the problem is you are pushing your podcast out usually to multiple platforms. So it's the first thing to understand that it's not a perfect science. Everybody is not necessarily on the same page about how they classify the information on what is a download, a view, or a watch. Those numbers, I think, are relatively loose in a lot of cases. Whether you are using a platform that is, pushing it out to lots of places and therefore giving you the analytics back in that one, or whether you're looking on individual platforms, you'll see those numbers can vary quite a bit. And what I am seeing is that, generally speaking, you have to look at separately what's going out to your standard podcast platforms. So whatever software you're using, whether you're using Spotify for podcasters, Captivate, Podbean, any number of those other ones that are out there, then what you've got to look at is what are the numbers being put that they're telling you that are on the various podcast standard platforms, and I'm talking about Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Player, any number of those ones, versus what's happening on YouTube. Now, we've done a separate video on YouTube, but I'll just recap very quickly to say that the big difference between the main podcast platforms and YouTube is very simple. YouTube is also a search engine. So the opportunity to get people coming back and listening to past episodes of your podcast, because that is something they are searching for and is relevant, is far greater than it is on any of the other platforms. If you think about it, when was the last time that you went to a Spotify or an Apple and you typed in a topic search and looked for a podcast that was relevant about a particular topic? It's not the first place you go, and rarely do you go there. You usually go looking for maybe a category, maybe you're looking at the most recent podcasts that are popular, or you're aware of a name from somewhere else and you're going looking for that particular podcast or person. It's not really a topic search scenario. I'm not saying it never happens. I'm just saying it's not the go-to place for most people, whereas Google and YouTube most definitely are. So it is really important to look at these two numbers separately and on an ongoing basis, because I've seen most definitely that YouTube is attracting new people all the time to past bits of content, whereas we're not seeing that generally on other platforms for all of the reasons I've just spoken about. Not to say it never will happen, it's just that the difference in the amount of people coming back is quite substantial. We're also seeing, from my perspective, much greater growth in the numbers on YouTube, even with next to no promotion. So I have some clients that are out there and they're pushing their podcasts, but generally speaking, they refer to it on the main platforms, the typical major platforms that we spoke about, Spotify, Apple, etc. And so that's where they've focused their attention, yet the podcast is sitting on YouTube, and I am seeing those numbers often are greater than the other platforms for those reasons that I've just spoken about. So it's very important that you look at both. One of the interesting things about the analytics and the numbers that you can understand on YouTube is when you go into it, it tells you where people are coming in, how long they're staying for, where they might be dropping off, where there might be points of interest, because nowadays, if you've got in the show notes and you've got those opportunities to give the different chapters or the different time markers, people are jumping ahead sometimes to those things. It gives you a pretty good indication as to what topics are really resonating. So I think that it's a really important thing to firstly understand. As we said, there's a differentiation between the numbers in the main platforms, even between each of those individual ones, and certainly a difference in the numbers you should look at on YouTube. Combine all of those to get a sense of where your podcast is at. I would never be too upset to compare and worry about comparing with other people. Set your own expectations of what it is. Some podcasts are very niched. You don't need to have thousands of people watching it. And in fact, I would argue that the big thing in the numbers game is not necessarily about those who download and actually watch or view it. Because the opportunity with the podcast is, of course, to fill your social media, your newsletters, your emails with content that comes from the podcast originally. And that may well try and push people to go and view the podcast, but the important factor, of course, in the credibility build and in educating your audience is sometimes enough in those little snippets that you get that people are viewing there. So I would say to you that if you're putting a post out, for argument's sake, as we do on LinkedIn, and you put 3 or 4 posts out and they're getting thousands of views of that particular post, and then you've also got the downloads that are happening on the normal platforms and you've got the YouTube ones, those combined numbers give you a much more realistic idea of the reach of your podcast. But again, let's look at the importance of it all. What do the numbers really mean? Now, there are certain points where you can get to where the opportunity to grab sponsors, to have advertising in general through various means on your podcast can become realistic. But let's be honest about that and say that there are not a majority of podcasts that fall into that category. And it's something that is worthwhile getting to, but it's not a dream that you need to necessarily have. Because at the end of the day, the real reason people are doing a podcast is to increase their sales. That's why you do a podcast. It's not, yes, there are a certain amount of people who are doing it just for fun and because they want to give, but even in the back of all of that, it's building credibility with an audience. It's hoping that that will lead down the track to more sales. So is tracking sales important from the podcast? It's a difficult thing to track because it all builds credibility. If you get clients who specifically say, hey, we've never met, I've just been following you on the podcast and I want to do business with you, that's great. And that may happen for some of you. And there are a lot of podcasts that offer lead magnets as part of it. And they're trying to bring people into that system. And that's all great. And that is part of the numbers that is worthwhile trying. But you have to be careful in the podcast if it is constantly about trying to drive people somewhere else that they have to give their details in, then you may leave a sour taste in people's mouths. Now, if there is bonus material and things that they can access, people love that, and it's worthwhile trying to collect their email addresses and build that over a period of time. And those numbers too are really important because you want to get to those people. So yes, have some of those things in there. Just tread that balance between not necessarily doing it with every episode and making people feel special about it and really adding some additional value. But those numbers where you drive people to the next level can be also very important. But the one thing that I think it gets left out of this and is a really important number to think about is how many people are you using with your podcast to directly go out and reach them? What are those numbers? Because we all have people who we would like to do business with, but they either don't know we exist or haven't taken our call. So how do you get to them? Well, a podcast is a terrific way to get to them because you go and you say to them, hey, this podcast might be of interest to you. Love your feedback. You're not trying to sell to them. You're trying to value them and their credibility and to bring them into the equation. In some cases, you might even consider bringing them in as a guest of your program if that's relevant. But the thing that is most important is that idea of opening doors. And if you can get more of your ideal clients by opening doors, and we'll come back to ideal as well, those numbers are also really important to think about. It's how much you use it and where you use it. Are you tracking those numbers? But let's talk about ideal clients lastly when we go into this whole numbers game. That's the thing sometimes. It may not be ultimately about how many thousands of downloads you get or how many, views on social media or even how many doors you knock on. It may well be in the end that one of the most crucial numbers is how many more ideal clients are you creating? And I say that because it may well be that you are talking to your existing audience and making them more aware of what they need to do to be an ideal client of yours, because they are starting to learn about the greater value proposition that you offer and how they, can work with you a little better. So that is a really important number to also think about. What is the percentage of your clients that are ideal, and measure that over a period of time. Sometimes it may change the way you think about your clients as well, but it's going to change the way they think about you because you are sharing valuable insights and information with them. Remember, it's also about educating them. So it means that the podcast is an opportunity to give information to your audience so you don't have to keep repeating it. Hence, it makes them more of an ideal client, right? If you're not having to repeat the same information all the time to people, but suddenly they come back to you and they know what it is it's about, then that is absolutely invaluable to you. So that is the numbers game. Lots of ways of thinking about podcasts. Is it important that you go out and seek millions of downloads? I don't believe it is. There are plenty of people that will try and get those for you. Some are real, some are not. But think about it this way. At the moment, the most important numbers are the ones that you think about how you can use the program in the best interests of your business to get more ideal clients. And sometimes the podcast is about educating your existing audience, and that's the only numbers that really matter. Now, of course, if you would like a podcast done for you, come talk to us at Podcast Done For You. We do everything. We can even host the program for you. So you just show up as an expert. We'll do the rest. Come talk to us. Podcast Done For You. The details are in the show notes below. We look forward to your company next time on the Podcast Done For You show.